Starts this period off looking at it as with the not just the War of the Roses and the 100 Years' War and all that, but he looks at the real trauma of something that had destabilized the church tremendously, but it destabilized the population even more, and that was the arrival of the Black Death, the Great Plague, which came was more severe than the earlier phases of it were very, very severe. And then you have, it comes back in increasing increments, because each time it comes back, it's less deadly, people survive and so forth, but you have it becoming more frequent. It's a very bizarre thing. It killed off, everybody debates this one, either a third of the population of Europe or half the population of Europe. And England already had a pretty low population at the time compared to the rest of Europe. So it's going to reduce that population somewhere around 5 million, from roughly 10 million to 5 million. And it has a severe impact on the issue of Parliament as well, because Parliament is again impacted. Nobody gets away from the Black Death, so many members have died off through that. And then you have the wars, subsequent wars, and then comes the War of the Roses, takes out all but 18 members of Parliament are left alive. But you also have this issue coming with the Black Death, was the horrible destabilization of the church. If you have one of the primary institutions in the world, as the Catholic Church was in the West, nothing could be worse than the fact that the clergy seem to have no more power, no more connections to God in terms of hanging on to life and the rest of it, than anybody else. They died like everybody else. It's going to destroy a lot of monastic life. Monastic houses were very big at the time. You had a number of major groups in England with monastic houses. The monastic population probably numbered, one would have to say at least 100,000, out of which 50,000 are going to be dead. They seem to have no more ability to summon the power of God to stop this thing than anybody else, nor did the parish priests. We're not able to do anything about it. They died like everybody else. The bishops, the archbishops, died like everybody else. This really, I think it goes a long ways to attacking the credibility of the church. We can't invoke God to stop this thing. What use are you? In other words, the church been around for a century. No one knows much about the first 3 centuries of the early church, but we do know that once it became institutionalized under Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, that it had a very familiar face in terms of the outward appearance, that is referring to the structure of the church, referring to its universal claim to encompass all Christians and so forth, by virtue of the popes, by virtue of the archbishops, the cardinal, not the cardinal yet, but in terms of archbishops, bishops, and then down to the parish priesthood, who was the most organized institution throughout the entire Middle Ages. Very organized, and it has expressed itself through its hierarchy. It wasn't that one went to church and you became a believer, and it's in the sense that one becomes a Christian because you believe in Jesus, period, or you read your Bible, or the things that people talk about in later years. But you were a Christian because you went to church and you accepted the authority of the church. You accepted the fact that the church represented the will of God, that the church had all the sacraments necessary to get you to salvation, and you participated in at least 6 of those 7 sacraments. The one you wouldn't participate in if you were there were 2 sacraments that were mutually exclusive: marriage and ordination. If you were ordained, you could not get married. If you were married, you could not get ordained. So you have 6 of the 7. But this was the expression that the church was the expression of God's power, God's will, through the sacramental system. And so every time the Mass was said, it's the reshedding of the body and blood of Jesus. And so you have that constant ritual going on, but with all of that element and all of that sacred power, all that authority, and the authority is vested in the ordained priesthood, from priest right through the Pope, up through the Pope. None of that could stop this plague. So what happens is a challenge to the organized church, to the church as an expression. People begin to simply say, forget it. I don't believe in this any longer. Now, that's going to show up almost right away following, I think, the early stages of the Black Death. Because you have a split that takes place in the church. It's not the Reformation, it's not that. It is what's called the Great Schism. You have the Babylonian captivity and the Great Schism. Two episodes in medieval church history. The Great Schism really begins when French archbishops declare themselves as authoritative as the Pope, and they will relocate what they consider to be the political head of the church, not in Rome any longer, but they'll relocate it to Avignon, France. Avignon, Avignon, France. And of course it's condemned by the rest of, but the Pope is removed. The Pope's no longer in Rome. Does that do anything to, so you have the Black Death and you have this on top of it. The question is, people are dying very early. People already die young. You die at 30, 32 is an average age for death in this period. Not just because of plague, it's just the way it is. Life is nasty, brutish, and short, as later Hobbes said. There's a lot of authors that say that. I think we've quoted that. But anyway, but at the same time, it is you have to have your midlife crisis by the time you're 15. Because you're going to be dead at 30, okay? So I don't think we can even deal with this stuff. Recently I had a friend of mine, bartender, but I've known him for 10 years. He died at 36 of an asthma attack. Absolutely unbelievable. He's still a good kid. And I'm thinking, my God, here I am, 75, and I feel like I'm 103, but you see people go this young. That was typical at the time. So there was a lot of dealing with the concept of death. It was always around. It's always there. One of the biggest problems that brought on the plague was it didn't bring on the plague, but it certainly supported it, and that's the lack of sanitation. Almost no sanitation. And then you have the church go through this. It loses its integrity because it can't stop the plague. It loses its authority because we no longer know who is the Pope. And if the Pope is the church, he's the vicar of Christ on earth. What does that mean for the authority? If you simply pick up from Rome and you now speak French, I think it says a lot to speak French. It means you, never mind. You better desert the front lines quick because the Germans are coming.
How did the French have political power to try that? To try moving the Pope from...
It's all politics. It's power and politics, and with the assistance of one of their major, certainly one of the major domestic feudal supporters, and that was the Burgundians. The Burgundians are the ones who betrayed the French during the 100 Years' War, betrayed the French, but they also will support a French Pope. There's a lot of power, a lot of money behind this, a lot of politics behind it. Did it work? It worked for a few years. And then you have a second split where the church is restored to Rome, but you have the rival papacy still there in Avignon, France, and this is the Babylonian captivity. It's named after the fact that because it's going to run 70 years, number one. And in the Old Testament, there is that time in which the children of Israel were captured by the Babylonians in 586 BC, and they were hauled off from ancient Israel to Babylon on the Euphrates River, the Euphrates River, where they will remain for 70 years until Babylon is destroyed by the Persians. Okay, so you have that kind of reference. What the bottom line, I get your question second, but the bottom line for all this is the church loses tremendous credibility throughout this episode. The plague, schism, Babylonian captivity, because what you have now are two popes, and both popes mutually excommunicate each other. That doesn't, to a Protestant, whatever that word means anymore, and I don't know. But to a Protestant, that doesn't, this is like, well, who cares? They excommunicate each other. But if you're a Catholic,
big deal.
And your life depends, and your eternal life depends upon successful administration of the right church and completion of 6 of the 7 sacraments as the means of grace to save your soul, and you're going to die at 30, because everybody did. They just waited, they just counted, oh God, next year it's over, Something's going to get you. Okay? But if you have all that stuff, what you believe in is very, very, very important. And how you believe in it. And when that belief system is under sustained attack by forces of nature, the plague, and by human forces intervening, the political crap that went on with the church. No miracles could save anybody, and so forth. Is that the world is coming to an end. It's all going to be over very soon. And God, nobody's here to help us. Down the line, this greatly weakens the Catholic Church. Now, I'd say it greatly weakened any church, but they were the only game in town at the time. You didn't have a Protestant church on any level, any kind of Protestants for real, until you get to 1520 with the coming of Martin Luther. Then after that, you have 150 years of religious wars back and forth between Protestant and Catholic, 150 years of killing each other. So, is it any accident, or is it just a, let's say, a fluke? As some people have suggested, that Henry VIII, when he divorced his wife Catherine of Aragon, but in order to pull that off, which he does later, pulls this off, he divides the church and he declares for the Protestant cause. And anybody that disagrees with him, you know, didn't pay to disagree with Henry VIII on any level. His Archbishop of Canterbury, very honest guy, Thomas Cranmer, was supporting Henry, but Cranmer is a real Reformation theologian. Henry's not. But he writes the codes of the new Protestant Church of England with Henry as head of the church in England. And he writes the articles for the Anglican Church, and of all the, let's say, all of the statements of faith coming out of the Reformation. You have Luther's 99 Thesis. You've got the works of John Calvin, Calvin's Institutes, 2 volumes. Victor Melanchthon, another supporter of Calvin. You've got Zwingli, Bullinger, a number of reformers. But the best statement ever written in the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, comes from the Church of England. Now, most people in America, first of all, they don't realize the Church of England is tied to the American Episcopal Church. It's now, they're separate, but that Episcopal Church comes out of the Church of England. But that the Church of England, they don't realize it's Protestant. They think it's still Catholic. Why? Because you still have many of the outward appearances of things that are very, very Catholic, but it's very different. The statement of faith, the articles of faith in this thing are definitively Protestant, but they're better written than anything Luther wrote, and much better thought out, more balanced than anything Calvin ever wrote. But people forget about that particular church because it just doesn't seem like it's a Protestant church. Nobody looks at it that way. But it becomes a very successful one, actually. Now, how did Henry pull this off? Well, it's not that Henry pulled it off. Everything was set before him. With the plague, with the Great Schism, with the Babylonian captivity, with so much of what would be let's say, any opposition to what Henry wanted. Henry could not have pulled this off had it been a century earlier. Would not have happened. There never would have been a Church of England separate. But it's only after these things destabilized the Roman Catholic Church in England that he was able to pull it off. And one of the things we'll show in here is Simon Schama's view of that in terms of how Henry approached this, how the church has changed dramatically, and how yet there is still a very large remnant of Catholic thinking in the Church of England. And there's always talk of reconciliation between the Church of England and the Catholic Church. Good thing today going on is this current Pope Francis is a breath of fresh air. I mean, he is different, and I'm utterly amazed at some of the statements that he makes, unless you read them carefully, and you see this guy has he's got a very firm balance in terms of issues versus persons. We're dealing with the persons, he says, we're not dealing with issues. We need to deal with the person. Not whether the person's gay or the person is whatever they might be. The person's had an abortion. We're not dealing with the abortion, we're not dealing with the gay. We're talking about dealing with the person. What is the person? What's the heart of the person? Where are they going? Yeah. This is hope. Boy, he's alienated a bunch of Catholics already. He's also alienated some Protestants in it, who also believe we're constantly tied to issues rather than, okay, the church was going through something like that at the same time back then. So all these things sort of come to a head. Yeah.
You honestly think I remember after your
No, I was hoping you didn't.
England, during the Great Schism, did they side with France or Rome?
No, people divided. This is part of the problem. It's split right down individual countries. There was no country on any single side. So sort of pay your money, take your choice. But what it does, why does it undermine everything? Your salvation depends on the sacramental system. But it depends on the sacramental system being administered by the right church. There's only one true church at that time. That's how they claim it. So if you have, then the one pope excommunicates another. What happens to the fact that you were, baptized, went through your catechism training, you're a proper member of the church, and all that stuff that you go through life. You go through 67 sacraments, right up to the end of death with extreme unction, the last rites and all that. None of this counts because you're in the wrong church. Wrong pope is running this thing. Sorry, Charlie. So if you look at the tangible issues tied to a group of people looking to only be 30 years old, the issues of life and death, it's a scary situation. And so Henry VII, when he comes to power, he's got to try to do something. England's lost a lot of population. One of the big sources of population loss was the working class. It's not called the working class, but basically those the peasant population, the serfs. The plague destroys serfdom in England like no other place. What was the serf population? Percentage-wise?
90% of the population.
It's close. Very close. You have everybody else is either noble or tied to noble houses and or a member of the clergy. In a sense, it's almost like the days before the French Revolution. You had the three estates. You had the nobles, you had the church, and you had everybody else. Yes?
And serfdom just means that you're not free economically, but you're free socially? Or is that the other way around?
You are tied to the land. You're born in an oral estate. You will most likely live and die and spend your entire life at that kind of, you'll never wander outside that area. Of course, in later years, there is wandering, but you're going to do the labor. But what happens when half that labor force is taken out? They're going out and they're going to demand. No longer just working for the medieval lord, but they're going to be demanding some funds, some money. Yeah, I'll work for you, but I'm going to do it for a price, and I'll go to the highest bidder. And there's a labor shortage, and everybody wants the labor. So labor comes into more or less into its own at this time. Serfdom disappears from England, and that's because England's population was already small. But if you look at the rest of Europe, the serf population is reduced the same period, but it doesn't destroy serfdom. Serfdom continues in much of Europe for the next several centuries in varying degrees. Okay, so what Henry VII's, I think, main focus has to be is looking at a country that's gone through really hell for almost over a century now. With one thing or another, it needs peace. It needs a sense of domestic tranquility. It needs to have the authority, some kind of church authority restored, if possible. It needs to stabilize its borders, particularly the border with Scotland, which has been in turmoil since the 13th century. She has asthma, so I want you to understand. She does have it. This is not influenza. It's asthma. Instead of taking drugs, she's drinking Diet Pepsi.
Does that work very well?
Cleans it out. I know. Well, I sympathize with that because that's what my friend passed away from, was an asthma attack at age 36. Okay, so he wants to stabilize the borders, number one. He's got to stabilize the political system. He's got to reinvent Parliament. He's going to try and find a way to stabilize the labor market as well. And so let's just sort of tackle these things one at a time. He's got a lot going on. 1485 to 1509, the dates. First of all, let's get rid of the immediate problems. We need to stabilize this dynasty. The most important thing we can do is stabilize the dynasty. We've just gone through a civil war known as the War of the Roses. It's killed off most of the nobility. We have almost no one left from either side of the royal family. Tudor Rose, Red Rose, or White Rose. Almost everybody's gone. So we need to make sure this dynasty is secure, that it's legitimate, and that it's recognized as legitimate, and that it's stable. That's his most important, I think, vision. Stabilize the dynasty after Civil War. No more adventurism in France. We can claim it all we want, but we don't have to go there. Let's just keep it cool. Well, he will go there one time, but that's kind of a funny little story. First thing he sets up is, again, we talked about this before, and that is the Star Chamber. Now, Star Chamber gets its name from the fact that where the chamber is held, it's like a group of judges making secret judgments, declaring certain noble houses null and void, now defunct, and selling off that property to someone else, to the highest bidder, or to someone that Henry favors. And it will include the provision of no private armies allowed. Private armies are nothing but trouble. Private armies mean you're going to have, this is the ingredient for civil war. It's an ingredient for rebellion against the king's wishes. So we have to deal with this. It's the only country in Europe that did it. Nobody else thought that far ahead. So therefore, we're going to rebuild the nobility almost entirely from scratch. And as I mentioned last time, at the last, basically most of England's nobility traced their roots to roughly 1485 and the years immediately following. Now with this, he's able to raise money because he's not giving these titles and the land away. There's a price to be paid. And so wealthy merchants can purchase this. You don't have to have a noble background of any sort to do this. But he sets his own standards. He knows who he wants. He wants what are going to later be called the king's men. Supporting him. His good supporters will, in fact, get most of this. So the support's there. He stabilizes the country. He builds Parliament up over the years to almost 100%. He's also built up one part of Parliament that hadn't been, it was involved, but it was not involved as much, and it wasn't as clear as to how it got there. And that is what we call the House of Commons. Because many of the new men that he's putting in Parliament would never fit the definition of noble by any standards. But these are guys that were second, third in the family. They inherited virtually no land, and they inherited virtually no title from their immediate ancestors. What they did keep is the family name without the title, which meant they could enter into any sort of work they wanted to, business of various kinds. One of the emerging businesses that's going to develop in England at this time is banking. They don't know just how profitable banking is yet. figure it out. Merchant shipping. As England begins to expand, slowly expand across the channel to trade with Flanders on the coast, began to develop more and more in the way of a major fishing industry as they discovered the Newfoundland cod banks. Totally, but they don't, English fishermen were already fishing the cod banks before anybody in England officially discovered the Americas. Who was the guy that does it? It's John Cabot. Sails across in 1497, and he's stunned. He's never seen this place before. It's teeming with fish. You can just, as he said, practically walk your ship across the bay because the cod were so thick. And the trees, the forests were so vast that you could smell the forest 300 miles out at sea. You could smell this whole thing. It's just so virgin. Wonderful area. And then he's stunned to find all these fishermen are there. They all have, they're all speaking, they come from Bristol, every place else. And he hears the accent and says, holy shit, I thought I found a new place. Who are these guys? How long have they been coming here? Apparently for quite a while. They kept it quiet, they didn't want anybody else to know where it was. And they're catching cod, and then they, put them in barrels, put them in salt, ship back and forth. It's a constant industry. And they didn't tell anybody where they were going, where all these cod came from. That way they kept it as part of the family secret, all right? So that's the beginning of England going overseas. But there's money to be made from all of this. It's the beginning of the sheep industry, the wool industry in England, as an industry. Because one of the things that Henry does, he begins what's called the enclosure laws. Enclosure means you begin to seal off a certain portion of land belonging to what had been the old manorial estates, and that was common land that was shared by the serf population. To grow whatever, sometimes to raise their own sheep individually, to gather wood for fires and so forth. This is all on the common land. Well, if you fence that off and say, I'm sorry, Charlie, no more. We're going to raise sheep on this. It becomes industrial sheep raising on the common land. It's called the enclosure laws. The enclosure keeps the peasant off the land. So what does the peasant wind up having to do? Serfdom is not working. There's no longer serfs. How are you going to make a living? They've taken the land. It's called, the way they're making a living domestically is going to be called the cottage industry. Meaning, you're going to be part of a cottage factory system that's plugged into the wool industry. But who runs the wool industry? Who runs this industry? Who's paying to set up these individual cottages, families, to process, to shave the wool off the sheep, to process this into a woolen product, to spin the wool, to manufacture it, to turn it into whatever, rugs, carpets, sweaters, clothing, all kinds of things. Who's making the money? Where's the money going? Who's making the money? It's the landowner who has no title. He's called commons or commoner. Later they're going to be known as the country gentry, or sometimes the merchant class. But this is the beginning of a fledgling middle class. Nobody else had a middle class in Europe. It really becomes the strength of England's history from this time on, is the growth of the middle class. Once you shut down your middle class, you've managed to screw yourself. And we came very close to doing that in the 1920s and 30s. We're coming very close to doing it again. Not here to preach, because after all, we have now shut down our government. I don't know what's the difference, do you? You will. Yeah, talk about One thing I like about England, they've kept the softer soft. They're not a schlock republic going on strike for 5 minutes or something. And I love all that pomp and ceremony. It's great stuff. All right. And Kate is so cute. She's just a sweetheart. All right. Now, back to normal thinking here. So the enclosure laws, domestic, beginning of things that will create a cottage industry, which is the beginning of England's real move into merchandising and industry itself and banking. They become the leaders within about a century and a half. The real leaders. The only great rival that Britain ever really has at this time would be the Dutch. And that's because the Dutch were also into shipping big time. They built ships. They had their own navy, but they had a merchant navy as well. The Dutch East India Company was a company within the company. And they controlled a lot of territory. Now, at the same time, you had overseas expansion, however, that had been begun by two major royal powers in the West, and that is Portugal and Spain. Portugal starts first in the 1420s. They conquered just across from Gibraltar. They launched a raid on a city called Ceuta, a Muslim city called Ceuta, C-E-U-T-A. Well, they captured the city. The city put up a hell of a fight, but they captured it. But what the Portuguese do here is raise their flag over non-contiguous territory, meaning territory that's not attached to Portugal or next door. It is across ocean, across open water to do it. That's later becomes the definition of what constitutes imperialism. I remember during the Cold War, they used to call Soviet Union sort of Russian imperialism. Well, it wasn't, because it only dealt with territory contiguous to Russia, meaning almost all of Eastern Europe, a heck of a big hunk of Asia. But it still was attached. It's when it took over Cuba, or tried to, this relationship, that's when people begin to say, okay, it really is an empire, they have the Cubans, okay. But the definition here, which will stick from this point on, is taking territory, raising your flag, and declaring your sovereign is the sovereign over this place over here, which is across open water. They captured Ceuta, and in Ceuta they found a vast amount of gold. The gold didn't come from Ceuta, it was gathered in Ceuta. Ceuta is a major Muslim trading port. You also had south of that, deep in the Sahara, the great city of Timbuktu. You've heard of Timbuktu. It also was on those trade lines, and the Portuguese discovered that these trade lines get well into central west, particularly central West Africa. So now what the Portuguese are looking to do is trying to find a way south along the African coast, which had never been explored. And from basically 1420 to 1500, the Portuguese are slowly making their way down the West African coast. They pass and go around the Cape of Good Hope, which they've named the Cape Buena Esperanza. In all the old maps, it's called Buena Esperanza, Cape of Good Hope. They sail north. Once they get past around the Cape of Good Hope, they sail north by northeast into the Indian Ocean, cross the equator, and eventually land on, they come to several locations. They discover the area of Aden on the Red Sea, between the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea. They move a little further east, they come to the Straits of Hormuz and rediscover the Gulf, the Persian Gulf. They then sail eastward again and come to the coast of India. and they establish a very large city on the west coast of India called Goa, G-O-A. It's called Golden Goa. They'll eventually, by the time you get to 1550, this is all from 1420 to 1550, they're on the move. By 1550, they've taken Indonesia. They've claimed it, they haven't taken it, they've claimed it. Which are also known as the Spice Islands, where the spices came from. And they have established a colony up the river at Canton, China, and across the Sea of Japan. They have discovered now the lost kingdom of Cipango, which turns out to be Japan. And they initiate trade with all of it. How many people are running this overseas trade empire? Vast thousands, right? 10,000 tops. It is, this to me, this is one of the most, I'd say, really wonderful little experiments in the movement of establishment of overseas colonization. Beginnings of the old imperialism. And it's done through the Portuguese crown. There's no company, there's no private companies here. This is the Portuguese crown. And it's the spread of the Portuguese Catholic Church. What's very important later, when the Protestants, after Protestantism arises, especially with the Dutch, coming the Dutch and the English, they're going to challenge the Portuguese control of the areas. And they're going to bring all those religious wars with them overseas. So most of Asia, Latin America, and so forth that are in the Middle East is going to experience a contact with the European power, regardless of which one it is. They're going to experience the conflicts within the context of those powers that are fighting each other all the time. They're constantly trying to garner allies in the Middle East, garner allies in India, garner allies in Indonesia, allies in Japan, allies in China, to take on the enemy. The enemy doesn't understand this at all. They don't understand why, what is this about? There was a pretty good TV series made a number of years ago. It's been on again. I saw it recently. About this operation of the Portuguese. And it's called Shogun. And it's about the establishment of the Portuguese power in Japan. And how that worked. All right. So, Portuguese are well established. We have 10,000 people running a vast overseas empire. It's paying off handsomely, and it also has some things that go along with it. This part of European history is very, very important. Part of English history is important, but in the larger context, looking at this tied together with, it's really the end of the Middle Ages in more ways than one. One of the reasons, what spurs the Portuguese to do what they do?
The Ottoman Sultan cuts off the trade route to the Middle East.
That's right. The coming of the Ottoman Empire. And before that, the great Arab states, the two great Arab kingdoms, the Abbasids, the Umayyads and the Abbasids, had challenged European authority in the Middle East, challenged the authority to trade in the Middle East. Eventually it results in the Crusades and a few other things. But what is this, what's with the Portuguese in this 15th and 16th century? What's their primary motivation? Is it trade? Is it exploration? No. Remember, this is the Middle Ages, still. You still have the medieval mindset. So while you're thinking this is a vast, great, wonderful period of exploration, adventure, and so forth, you have to look at one of the major players in Portugal to get an idea of what this is about. And it so ties to this specific period as no other period. His name was Henry the Navigator. You've heard of him. But what about it? This is a name that was given to him by others because he is the one that did the vast amount of exploration down the west coast of Africa, found the gold connection they were looking for, built a fortress there called San Jorge de la Mina, St. George of the Mines, where gold was both discovered and gold was also in addition brought there. He negotiated trade treaties with the Congo Kingdom, which at that time extended clear to the Atlantic. But what he did that he's most proud of, he established, as if we needed one more Catholic order. Now I say as if we needed one, we already had about 100 of them. But it's called the Order of Christ. Oh, it must be an exploring order. Whatever. No, it is a Catholic order. It's a military order designed to do one thing: crusades. This is a crusade. It's a 15th and 16th century crusade. Everybody thought the crusades were over by the 12th century. No, they're still doing it. But they just picked up a few other things on the way. Like what? Slavery. In the Congo Kingdom, they were able to buy tons of people off the coast. They didn't have to go seize them, they bought them. From Alfonso, the Congo Kingdom. What were they going to do with them? Put them on the new islands they discovered in the process of going around the west coast of Africa. What islands? The Canaries, Azores, and the Madeiras. Why? What's on those islands you need slaves for? Sugar cane. Tough to deal with. Back-breaking work. Average person trying to do this may live 5 years. You're going to be dead. So we need a constant supply of slaves, and that's the beginning of slavery. As the Portuguese Empire expands, moves across the Atlantic, expands into what? What one single area? Brazil. It was an accident. Got blown off course. They thought they landed in East Africa or West Africa. No, they landed on East Brazil. Well, once they were connected, we know that. But this is after continental drift had done this thing about 3,000 miles apart there. But they landed on. So they brought. That's why nobody could speak Spanish in Brazil and get away with it. You got to speak Portuguese. And if you think they're anything alike, try it sometime. Okay? I speak pretty good Spanish, and I'll tell you, I can never understand a word of Portuguese. My ear just wasn't that good, but I'll tell you. It's a crusading mentality. It's merchant, trade, overseas imperialism, because everything they glom onto, they hang onto. And they're going to seize the first land in South Africa, the area later known as Cape Town. It's going to be a Portuguese colony. What are they going to do there? They're going to raise olives, and they're going to raise grapes, and they're going to make wine and sell it to everybody else going around the Cape. By the time you are down the West African coast, sailing from Western Europe, you're going to be ready for a little wine when you hit the Cape. Around that corner, Cape of Buena, and it really becomes, after a couple of shots of that, it really becomes Buena Esperanza. The Cape of Good Hope. This is Good Hope. All right. So, age of exploration followed now by Spain. But Spain faces a judgment. Spain wants to also go the same way as the Portuguese did. So they appealed, but the Portuguese said, no, you're not. You can't do it. We already did this. We claimed these areas in the name of God, in the name of Holy Mother Church and everything else. You can't come. Spanish said, well, we're bigger than you, and we will come. They appealed to the Pope, Pope Adrian IV. The year, I believe, is 1499. I'm not sure about that date. It's called but it's the papal treaty. Adrian IV. The Treaty of Tordesillas, T-O-R-D-I-S-I-L-L-A-S. Torda, T-O-R-D-A-C-S-S-I-L-L-A-S, Treaty of Tordesillas. I believe it's 1499, or could be mistaken. He divides the world between the Catholics and Spanish. Now, he didn't bother to ask anybody else. Chinese, Japanese, Arabs, anybody else. Oh, what do you think about this? This is pretty one-dimensional pope. He's got pretty much of a Eurocentric view. Protestant Reformation hasn't started yet, so he doesn't have any real opposition at all. So he simply divides everything to the west of a certain parallel running in the Atlantic. To the west of that goes to Spain, goes to Portugal, and to the east goes to Portugal, to the west goes to the Spanish. So the Spanish have open carte blanche to sail anywhere in the Atlantic, but you can't go down the African coast. You can go down, but you can't claim anything. You can't claim any land. You can't land on India, do your best. But you can go across the other direction, and they will do it. They're going to go across, they're going to hit the New World, they're going to claim everything, and the only part that they can't claim in the New World is what? Brazil. Because that's included under the original Treaty of Tordesillas. So as they move into that part of the world, is this also a crusade? That's the question. Yes, it is, because by definition, both of these trading empires are doing one big thing. They're both encircling, both breaking out of encirclement and encircling Islam. They look at the Arabs, they look at the Turks, they look at Muslims throughout the whole inner region. From the west coast, northwest coast of Africa, right through the heart of the Middle East, going to Afghanistan and northwest India, that is all looked at as one great monolithic, Arab, Islamic monolithic issue for them that has to be cut off and encircled. We're going to bypass these people. We've now found what we were looking for, trade. We found the Spice Islands. We found the source of hardwood. We found pepper, cinnamon in India, nutmeg, mace in the Indonesian islands. It's an absolutely gold mine for those that have this. Why? Because it spices up the food. Europeans generally had terrible food in the Middle Ages. You want a good meal, go to the Turkish Empire, or go to the Middle East, or go to China. But do not go to Europe. And they had nothing to wake up with in the morning, so they started with a beer.
All the time.
No coffee yet.
No bloody berries.
No bloody berries. They didn't know what celery was yet.
That's a problem then.
That's the problem. So you have all that good stuff going on, but it's the encirclement. You encircle Islam, you've cut off the world of Islam, you've met the great challenge that Europeans have been trying to do since God knows when. So what does this mean? This means that eventually you're going to have a real conflict, economic conflict between the Muslim world and the West on who controls this trade back and forth between Asia and Europe. So one of the big issues here that comes along is once you've mastered this trade, one thing is discovered. It's a lot cheaper to trade by ship than it is by camel. It's also faster. So you have at the same time the rise of the three great Muslim trading empires that are going to challenge that. The Ottoman Empire is going to challenge it. It's Sunni Orthodox, takes control of Turkey and takes control of all the Middle East in 1517. This is all happening at the same time. You have a rival empire in Persia, known as the Safavid Empire, S-A-F-A-V-I-D, Safavid, S-A-F-A-V-I-D, the Safavid Empire. It's Shiite. You have a rival ruler, the Shah, versus the Turkish Sultan. They hate each other, but they'll trade with each other, and they keep the interior trade coming all the way between China and India, going into Europe, and trade from Europe going back into China and India. They maintain that. The last of those empires covers Afghanistan and India, and that is the Mughal Empire, M-U-G-H-A-L. Founded by Akbar the Great. It's interesting, that's what his name, when English translators translate his name, they translate Akbar the Great. But that's what Akbar means. It's an Arabic word. He's the Great. Anyway, you'll have continuing rulers. It's called the Peacock Throne. Rule all of northern India, eventually all of India, and then, in addition, Afghanistan as well. When the Portuguese come to the coast of India, they get there about 1500, and they're allowed to build the city of Goa. Who allows them to build the city of Goa? It's the Mughals, the Mughal Empire. And you have to give us 15% of all your trade profit. Okay. So much for the great Portuguese overseas empire. The Mughals dictate to them what you're going to pay. You're going to trade with us, you're going to trade for pepper, you're going to trade for cinnamon, you're going to trade for gold, you're going to trade for the diamonds and rubies we have, you're going to trade for any number of products that we make here in India, especially weaving trades and so forth. Fine. 15% surcharge. Okay. And they do it. They'll do it.
Okay, so it's back a little bit, but like, so for the papal treaty, so, you know, the Pope makes this declaration, and I mean, I know the English weren't like huge on expansion and exploration yet, but like.
They're gonna get it, they're gonna get on.
Right, but I mean, like, the Dutch were like, well, shit, that sucks, but okay, like, they just took it?
Well, what happens is, we're gonna go into that right now.
Oh, okay.
Finish off this exploration business. You have a challenge to the established order of trade and empire. And you have to look at the big picture. You've got a globe that is now divided between three large Muslim empires that control parts of Europe, parts of Africa, and much of Asia. In Europe, you've got the two major Catholic powers, Portugal and Spain, taking area all around those great Muslim empires, trying to zero in on it by seaborne trade through that door. And then comes the Protestant Reformation in 1520, and all hell breaks loose in Europe. The first group, the Lutherans, that whole thing. But what it does is it eventually produces a whole new idea on what it means to be a spiritual person in the Western faith. And the Catholic view had always been that one who is very spiritual is one who connects to the land, their labor is with the land, they're connected to the land. Anything else is bad news. Any other kind of labor, if you're a merchant, if you're a banker, if you're involved in these sleazy enterprises, God will not reward you. Well, along come the Protestants, who have a whole different philosophy. It's especially the Calvinists. Nothing like making a buck for Jesus. And it's true, and they still believe this. So it's the birth of trade capitalism that's supported by the teachings of John Calvin that say it's okay, you can glorify God by making a buck, but do it honestly. Okay. They go at loggerheads because now they see, you talk about holy war, the Protestants now see their challenge against the Catholic control of trade and empire across the oceans as a sacred obligation to challenge that. And they do, and you have a number of Protestant groups that do it. Every one of them. On the coast of France, you've got the French Huguenots, Huguenots. Huguenots are business people, they're bankers, they're merchant shippers, they're on the coast. They become Protestants. France doesn't become Protestant, but this group on the coast does. The King of France is not a Protestant. He's still a Catholic. He'll declare war on his Protestant subjects. But those French Huguenots begin to build ships and trade overseas. In Scotland, goes to the Reformation, the establishment of the Presbyterian Church. They are 100% committed to overseas trade. Building their own fleet, they're separate from England, and they're going to build their own fleet, and they're going to trade. And they're 100% absorbed with the Calvinist idea. Yep.
So you're saying all these reformations are less about differences in doctrine and spirituality and more about, well, we can make more money if we believe this.
It's all, it's tied, there are certain aspects that are tied to money, and it's mostly the Calvinist groups. Lutherans don't seem to do this. The Zwingliites and others don't do it. The Church of England doesn't even do it, though it has a sort of a Calvinist theology attached to it. But by far, the fiercest of these groups were the Dutch. And the Dutch are located right on the coast. And they are part of the Spanish Empire. They have been. They were part of Spain on land, in European context. The one ruler that comes to, you have Ferdinand and Isabella uniting Spain together with the Kingdom of Aragon and Castile. And then you have this incorporation of more acquisitions through marriage with the Austrian royal family, the Habsburgs. And so you have the Habsburgs become the major family of Spain and the Spanish Empire. And Spain becomes a huge power this time, huge, because of acquisition and because of overseas trade. And then then you have this part that's known as the Spanish Netherlands, right on the channel. And these guys convert to Calvinism. And the Spanish king, the next king, Charles V, Habsburg king, he's ruling from Vienna, occasionally rules from Madrid. But either location, he tells his subjects in the Netherlands, get with the program, boys, you're Catholics. You better behave yourself, or I'm sending the military in, we're going to get rid of all of you. So now what's just discontent breaks into open major military collision between Protestants and Catholics, with Philip V's attempt to subjugate the Dutch Protestants. So the Dutch Protestants declare war against their own monarch and declare independence. And the leading house, the leading medieval house that sort of leads the standard of the Dutch revolt is the House of Orange. They never call the leader the king. He's always called a stamp holder. Well, tied to this comes one of the most amazing, let's say, pieces of connectivity between business and the state. And that is, within the state, you have 5 cities that unite to form a major partnership in the Spanish Netherlands headed by the city of Rotterdam and Amsterdam, which have numbers, 5 altogether. They're gonna form the Dutch East India Company, which builds at that time the finest ships built by anybody. These are all merchant warships. The Dutch don't have a separate navy. Their navy, the Dutch East India Company, is the navy. Most of their ships have roughly 40 guns, 20 each side. They're faster than anybody else's. And they decide to take on the Spanish in what way? Not just a war on land. How do they get rid of the Spanish on land? You just flood the dikes. Everything goes underwater. I mean, the Spanish they're carrying armor, not water wings. They don't have floaties. They come with. So, flood the dikes. The Spanish loses another army. They just recruit more men. Their biggest area of recruitment, since they ruled half of Europe, was Italy. The area called the Spanish March, all the way from central Italy up through the Alps into Habsburg Empire, Austria, and then filtered down into Spain. And most of the guys were Italian speaking. They were part of this military. The Spanish had their hands full with this revolt, because now the revolt is going to spread overseas. The Dutch are going to attack the Spanish at every opportunity, every location, almost everything the Spanish gained, the Dutch take away.
Is this the Spanish under the Habsburg crown?
It still is. It will remain that. It's going to remain that. The split is going to come after the death of Philip V, Charles V. And then you have about 1550, you have Spain, Spanish Habsburg separate from the Austrian Habsburg. Okay, I should have brought that down later. Now, they have all this turmoil going. It's a very confused period. And have I lost you already? A long time ago? But anyway, stay confused, and that way you'll have to keep coming to class to find out what happened. Something like that. So, it is a confusing period. The Scots developed their own fleet for a brief period of time. Sorry, the Campbells were not involved with that. It's broke his heart again. Okay. You just pull your little kilt out and float anyway. So
I'm working on buying one.
you're working on black. Don't bring it to class. Your sister's embarrassed by you.
Okay, I've been doing that since I was born.
Okay, so. We're not starting a feud. This feud has come to class, courtesy of these two. But then the English get involved, very slowly. And it starts with the two periods of exploration activity. Just 2 years after, just actually 5 years after Columbus hits landfall in the New World, 5 years later, John Cabot and his son Sebastian Cabot are on the move for England, moving across the Atlantic, hitting the area of the Grand Banks, probably the area of Hudson's Bay and so forth. You have one ship go over, make that connection in 1497. The next year, John Cabot did it again with 5 ships. We don't know what he found because none of them ever came back. It's rough, tough water in the Northwest. But what they're looking for, besides fish, which nobody's really looking for fish except the guys that do the fishing. Trust me, only fishing fanatics look for fish. But what they're looking for is the Northwest Passage. To what?
Asia.
Asia. China. They've heard about it. Because the Portuguese found it already. And they're telling, they're keeping it a secret. Where do you find, where's China? We found it, and we're not telling you. The Spanish couldn't even get it out of them. They hated each other. I mean, it's like, nothing worse than relatives who fight each other all the time. Not you two, but the Spanish and the Portuguese had no love for each other. They're vying for power, they're vying for space on a small peninsula. They're going for global status. Each are trying to muscle their way into something they don't even know where they're going. At the same time, you now have a collision with the Protestants. So the Spanish now take an extra effort to do something very dramatic. Under Magellan, they're going to take one big trip. They're going to check out the Pacific, which no one has done. Dutch aren't there yet. Portuguese have gotten there, but only along the coast, the China coast, and into Japan, but nothing beyond that. And so Magellan decides to find out just how accurate this theory is of a globe. Is this really a globe? And so, in what has to be one of the greatest expeditions in history, he takes off from Spain. He sails southwest, toward the tip of South America, to go around the Cape Horn. But he finds a channel that runs through it, known as the Straits of Magellan.
Not at that time.
And somehow he actually got through it. He named it.
Oh.
He's named after it. I don't think he was that old. I'm naming this the Straits of Magellan. And no, he went through it. He actually got through it. Ships trying later. Did you ever see the I guess it was the Marlon Brando version of Mutiny on the Valley? Ever seen that thing where they're trying to get to Tahiti? But Captain Bligh decides to go to Tahiti through the Straits of Magellan instead of around the Cape of Good Hope. He's going to go westward instead of east. And anyway, the ship doesn't make it. It's just almost impossible to do it, especially the sailing ships. It was the most risky trek going. Worst currents in the world, highest waves anywhere, just a total freaking nightmare. The Antarctic currents, you've got Pacific currents, you've got South Atlantic currents, all colliding, massive waves, and he makes it. This ship was about 10 feet long. No, but it's not big. Then he got clear across the Pacific, and he claimed the Philippines. Names it for Philip of Spain, King Philip of Spain. Remember, when you spell Philippines, how many P's and how many L's? How do you spell Philip? One L, just one L, folks. Okay. But it's named after Philip of Spain. All right, Philip II. He does it. The interesting thing about the Philippines, it's the only Spanish colony that never learns to speak Spanish. A lot of Spanish names, but nobody speaks the language.
A lot of the Tagalog words are
Corrupt Spanish.
extremely similar to
It's
Spanish.
like Spanglish.
Kinda.
Okay. You're both Philip. Were you born there or you born here?
No, I was born in LA. My mom.
Well, that's the
Our mom
Philippines.
was born in the Philippines, right? I know. Our mom was born in the Philippines.
Okay. LA. Why did Philip born in LA? Well, there's one good reason. Yeah. USC probably needed a coach at the time, so. You're always in need of a coach. Okay, so you had all these claims going on, counterclaims, and then you have the war of religion moving across open ocean, and you have a real dramatic change in the amount of seagoing and how well it goes, how fast these ships can go, because the Atlantic experience, possessed by all of the major powers, Catholic and Protestant, the Atlantic experience is going to mature Western merchantmen and naval naval ships. They're gonna develop new techniques of what, navigation, using celestial navigation, developing the astrolabe again, which has been originally a Chinese invention. They're gonna build both lantine and square rig sails that can go against the current, go against the wind. They're gonna develop, very importantly, how to measure speed, which nobody had done before. You knew roughly how many days you were at sea, but then again, you didn't know how fast you were going. You didn't really know on a given day. By tying knots on ropes and throwing the ropes overboard, and you pull it back and you have a bucket tied to the end of that, it pulls the rope out. That's pretty primitive, but you can bring back, how many knots did it pull out? Then you have the beginning of the nautical mile. And then the application of firepower to ocean-going craft, big, big deal. Those people that never learned that correctly lost a lot of ships. You have, let's say, on average, a 20-gun ship. It's set on rollers. You have to account for recoil. Most ships at the time before this period had one gun in the front, one gun in the back. That's not a problem. Recoil is not an issue fore and aft, but it is an issue if it's on port and starboard side. Ship ricochet, recoil, if the piece of artillery doesn't break loose, firing this thing rocks the ship in the opposite direction. And so in the Atlantic, those wars in the Atlantic in the early days, they were constantly blowing each other up, but not with each other's cannonballs. It just simply, light the fuse, off goes the piece of artillery, it fires, but it shoots off the other end of the deck. It takes 5 guys with them. So it's not working well. So you have to learn to apply that technology to ocean-going craft without sinking your ship. It's a big challenge. It took probably 50 years to develop before they ever got it right. We know that later Henry VIII built the ship the Mary Rose, which was found in the Channel. It's now down at, I was going to say Southampton, it's not Southampton.
Portsmouth.
Yeah, you've got the 3 ships there. You've got the Mary Rose, and you've got the Victory, and you've got the Warrior, which is a combination steam and, right, great. I love that place. But look at the Mary Rose. There's evidence that Mary Rose sank accidentally testing recoil firepower. And this is Henry VIII's day, which is we haven't got to yet. It hasn't arrived yet, but that's what they're trying to do. So what are the English trying to find? They're trying to find an alternate way to get to not to the New World. They know where that is, but they want to get to China for trade. They're not part of the Treaty of Tordesillas, so they're saying, screw you, screw the Pope. Nobody asked us, so we're gonna do it. But you got to find a passage. The assumption was there was a passage. We now know there was never a passage. You could wind up in Hudson's Bay. You could wind up in a total Arctic mess. A number of expeditions disappeared in northern Canada. Trying to find the Northwest Passage. The last attempt at it was in the mid-19th century, and they found the bodies. National Geographic did a whole publication on it. They found the bodies of these explorers in northern Canada, just below the Arctic Circle, in northern Canada, guys of the 1850 expedition. That's how late they were still trying to find the Northwest Passage. Now, a little global warming can help. It'll melt everything, so don't worry about it. Okay, we'll find it. So what the English do to compensate here, within a very short period of time, they're going to try to find what's called the Northeast Passage. How to get to China going over the top of Asia. In other words, you go north of Scotland, past Scandinavia, hang a sharp right, and you're in the Arctic Circle, you're in Bering Sea and everything else. You're in that whole, not Bering Sea, but you're in the Arctic Ocean. They didn't find China. They found Russia. They found Russia ruled by Ivan the Terrible. So being very inventive at that time, they said, fine, let's take full advantage of this. Let's make a trade contract with Ivan the Terrible. So they do. It's called the Muscovy Company. Why are the British doing this? Why are the English doing this? Because they are Calvinists. They're part of that same, they are out for business. And they've become very good at it. They're slow at starting, but they're damn good at it. So they're building begin the process of building a trading empire during the Tudor dynasty. Later becomes really an empire of trade, of settlement colonies and everything else. It's going to dominate a fourth of the world and a fourth of the population of the world. It's the most successful overseas empire probably ever devised. The British Empire, and it was still around when I was a kid. And the best description I ever saw of it was in the movie, English movie called Hope and Glory. Did we ever see it? Why don't we just bring a snapshot of this thing? It's World War II is starting. And you have the old school marm. She's in her map. She pulls the map out. Says to the kids, you see this pink, all this pink on this map? It's wonderful. It's the British Empire. And the kids are gonna laugh. Typical kids. And she says, and all men are fighting and dying to preserve that empire for you little twerps. I thought I was gonna land on the floor and never get up. So funny. So well done. That empire's gone, pretty much. But look for the pink on the map. There's always a little bit of pink left. I'm always hopeful. Since I love British Empire studies, I'm always hopeful that it's gonna bring back the empire. Bring it back. See you guys later. Take care.